Efforts to bring about a resolution to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine continue, with recent reports indicating President Trump's push for a direct meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This diplomatic drive is paired with a renewed threat of sanctions against Russia, signaling a multifaceted approach from the U.S. The idea of a direct summit between Putin and Zelensky has been a recurring theme in international peace efforts, with many believing that face-to-face dialogue is essential for any significant breakthrough. Recent reports indicate that President Trump believes such a meeting is going to happen and lamented that it hasn't transpired sooner. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has also offered to facilitate a meeting in Istanbul, where previous rounds of direct talks between Moscow and Kyiv have taken place. Parallel to the diplomatic push, the United States has continued to maintain, and at times, renew sanctions on Russia. The European Union, for instance, recently adopted its 18th package of economic sanctions against Russia in July 2025, targeting various sectors including energy and financial services, and introducing new measures to combat circumvention. These sanctions aim to exert economic pressure on Russia, limiting its ability to fund its military operations and sustain its economy. The dual strategy of pushing for high-level talks while simultaneously applying economic pressure reflects a complex diplomatic balancing act. The hope is that the threat of continued or intensified sanctions might incentivize Russia to engage more constructively in peace negotiations. For Ukraine, such a meeting presents an opportunity to address core issues of sovereignty and territorial integrity, although past experiences foster caution regarding Russia's commitment to agreements. The international community, including the United Nations and various European nations, continues to call for a comprehensive ceasefire and a lasting peace in Ukraine, with ongoing diplomatic efforts seeking to find a viable path forward. The reported push by President Trump for a meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, alongside renewed threats of sanctions on Russia, stems from several interconnected geopolitical and strategic considerations. One key reason is the protracted nature of the conflict in Ukraine. The war has dragged on for over 2 years, causing immense human suffering, displacement, and significant global economic disruption. There's a persistent international desire for a resolution, and direct talks between the top leaders are often seen as a critical, albeit difficult, step toward de-escalation and peace. Trump's past rhetoric has also suggested a belief that he could personally broker a deal, viewing high-level summits as essential. Another driver is the desire for diplomatic leverage. By simultaneously pushing for a meeting and threatening sanctions, the U.S. aims to exert dual pressure on Moscow. The prospect of easing sanctions could be presented as an incentive for Russia to engage genuinely in negotiations, while the threat of new or intensified sanctions serves as a disincentive for continued aggression. This carrot and stick approach is a common diplomatic tactic, even if its effectiveness can vary. Furthermore, geopolitical shifts and strategic calculations play a role. As global power dynamics evolve, the U.S. and its allies are continually assessing the most effective ways to manage the conflict and contain Russia's influence without direct military confrontation. Encouraging dialogue while maintaining economic pressure is a strategy aimed at achieving a stable outcome that aligns with Western interests, ideally involving a sovereign Ukraine. Finally, domestic political considerations might also be at play. For any U.S. leader, being seen as actively working towards peace and attempting to resolve major international conflicts can resonate positively with voters, regardless of the ultimate outcome. High-profile diplomatic efforts allow leaders to demonstrate leadership on the global stage. These interwoven factors contribute to the U.S. strategy of combining diplomatic outreach with economic coercion in an effort to bring an end to the hostilities in Ukraine. The consequences of President Trump's dual strategy of pushing for a Putin-Zelensky meeting while simultaneously renewing sanctions threats on Russia are multifaceted and can have significant implications for the Ukraine conflict and broader international relations. One major consequence is the potential for mixed signals and strategic confusion. While the intention might be to apply both carrot and stick, the simultaneous push for dialogue and heightened pressure can be interpreted differently by Moscow and Kiev. Russia might view the sanctions threat as an obstacle to genuine talks, or as a sign of American unpredictability. Ukraine, while desiring a meeting with Putin, might be wary of being pressured into concessions if the US seems overly eager for a quick resolution. This ambiguity can hinder effective diplomacy and make both sides hesitant to fully commit. Another consequence is the risk of escalating economic tensions. The threat of secondary sanctions or high tariffs on countries doing business with Russia, as reportedly suggested by Trump, could create significant friction with US allies and other major trading partners like China and India. These countries rely on Russian energy or other goods, and imposing such broad measures could disrupt global markets, harm allied economies, and potentially undermine the international coalition against Russia, rather than strengthening it. The Kremlin, for its part, has often appeared to shrug off sanction threats, indicating a high tolerance for economic pressure. Furthermore, the emphasis on a high-level summit, particularly one involving President Trump, can raise expectations for a quick breakthrough that may not be realistic given the deep-seated nature of the conflict and the maximalist demands of both sides. If a meeting does occur but fails to yield substantive results, it could lead to increased cynicism about diplomatic efforts and deepen the sense of stalemate, potentially emboldening Russia or disheartening Ukraine's supporters. Finally, the approach can impact Allied unity and strategy. European allies, who are directly affected by the conflict and Russian aggression, have often favored a more coordinated and long-term strategy of support for Ukraine and pressure on Russia. A perceived, unilateral, or rapidly shifting U.S. approach could create discord within NATO and the broader Western alliance, complicating future joint efforts to address the conflict. Russia might seek to exploit any divisions that emerge. Predictions. The prediction for a direct meeting between Putin and Zelensky, especially one brokered by a U.S. president, remains highly uncertain and faces significant hurdles. While President Trump has expressed optimism, achieving such a summit requires both leaders to perceive a tangible benefit and a credible pathway to de-escalation, which has been elusive thus far. Low probability of immediate breakthrough. Even if a meeting occurs, a swift and comprehensive resolution to the conflict is unlikely. The core issues: Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty, security guarantees, and Russia's stated objectives are deeply entrenched. Past diplomatic efforts have consistently stalled on these points. Risk of misinterpretation of sanctions. The renewed sanctions threat, while intended to create leverage, could be perceived by Russia as a sign of continued hostile intent, potentially making them less inclined to serious concessions. Continued war of attrition. Absent a fundamental shift in military realities or a willingness for major compromises from both sides, the conflict is likely to continue as a prolonged war of attrition. Internal pressures on Zelensky. Zelensky faces immense domestic pressure to not cede territory or sovereignty. Any perceived pressure from the U.S. to compromise could be politically damaging for him. Putin's calculus. Putin's willingness to engage will depend on his assessment of military advantage and whether a meeting offers a path to legitimize his gains or reduce Western support for Ukraine, rather than genuinely seeking a full withdrawal. Solutions. Achieving a lasting peace in Ukraine requires a combination of sustained pressure, diplomatic engagement, and clear security assurances. Sustained and coordinated sanctions. Sanctions are most effective when applied consistently and multilaterally. Any threat of sanctions should be part of a coordinated strategy with allies, like the EU, to maximize economic pressure on Russia, targeting specific sectors and individuals to minimize unintended humanitarian consequences. The goal is to alter Russia's strategic calculus, not just punish. Clear and unified diplomatic front. While high-level summits can be impactful, they must be meticulously prepared. International efforts, including those led by the UN or other mediating countries like Turkey, need to present a unified message to both Moscow and Kiev, outlining realistic pathways for negotiation based on international law and Ukraine's sovereignty. Robust security guarantees for Ukraine. For Ukraine to consider any form of negotiated settlement that might fall short of immediately regaining all occupied territory, strong, legally binding security guarantees from Western powers are essential. These guarantees would reassure Ukraine against future aggression and enable it to rebuild. This might involve long-term military aid, intelligence sharing, and defense industrial cooperation, potentially even if full NATO membership remains a distant prospect. Focus on humanitarian issues, prioritizing and achieving humanitarian ceasefires, prisoner exchanges, and safe corridors for civilians can build small amounts of trust, even amid ongoing conflict, potentially paving the way for broader political dialogue. Reconstruction planning. Initiating and coordinating international efforts for Ukraine's post-war reconstruction, potentially utilizing frozen Russian assets, could also serve as an incentive for peace and a demonstration of long-term commitment. Ultimately, a solution hinges on either a decisive military outcome, unlikely for either side currently, or a political settlement requiring significant concessions and trust building, a process that is inherently slow and complex given the depth of the conflict.